you have to almost prove it first, right? And really have that servant attitude where even though you're technically part of the ownership team and helping them, you feel like you're almost working for that portfolio company and really gaining the trust of that CFO and CEO and trying to help them out. My take on it, and maybe it's because that's what I did, I think longer term, whether you go back into the industry on the outside or private equity or investment banking, they can all be very financially rewarding. So you really need to figure out the type of personality you have.
Hey there, this is David Mariano, and welcome to episode number 71 of Finance Career Launch, the show that helps you own your career. This podcast and the rest of your Finance Career Launch membership provides the training and support to help you develop, contribute, and advance. And if you're not yet a member, go ahead and register for no charge by visiting financecareerlaunch.com and clicking that big blue button. When you do that, you get instant access to the video series, The 7 Pillars of a Successful Career in Finance, along with some other really great stuff. If you are trying to decide which finance career is right for you, look no further. In this episode, our guest today has experience in investment banking, private equity, and as a CFO. We discuss each in detail and talk about how to decide which is right for you. So as I mentioned, our guest is really a rare breed. Matt Turk began his career as an investment banker with Bank of America and then joined Brockway Moran and Partners, a middle market private equity firm down in Florida. Now, driven by Matt's interest and also the need for help, he then moved into the CFO roles for two different Brockway Moran portfolio companies, not at the same time, one after another. Matt is now a principal with Blue Sea Capital, another middle market private equity firm, and it was one that spun out of Brockway Moran. Some of the partners left to form a new fund, and they're all friendly and everything, but he is now with that new fund, Blue Sea Capital. Now, Matt's still a really young guy, but you wouldn't know it by all that experience. We talk in detail about each stop along his career journey, what he liked, what he didn't like, some of the nuances of those different career paths, and then also discuss how you might be able to decide which finance career is right for you if you're considering one of those three. So please enjoy this conversation with Matt Turk. Hey, Matt, thanks for joining me on the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Dave, and it's glad to join and be part of this.
Yeah, great to have you here. And as we get into it here, people will come to find out you just have a great, interesting background. You've done a lot of neat things, and I think you'll bring a unique perspective that people enjoy hearing. What I want to hit first is we all kind of have an origin story about why we got into finance or the positions that we got into. What was that initial reason or reasons you became interested in the whole banking, private equity transaction world of finance?
Yeah, no, that's a great starting point, and I had a little bit of a unique situation. I, grew up in Cleveland, and was going to school for accounting at Miami, Ohio, great accounting school, and was all set to go join Big Four, PwC. Had done an internship there, and along the way, I met a guy who had done investment banking, and to be honest, we didn't really. I never even knew what investment banking was, and where I grew up, no one really felt like accounting was a good background, and my dad was an accountant, and a lot of his brothers were, and no one even talked about investment banking, and at Miami they didn't really, at that time at least, they didn't have a lot of clubs or whatnot. So when this guy was telling me about it and thought I would be a good candidate, I was excited to go, and it sounded competitive. I'm a competitive guy, and you challenged with going up against other people from top Ivy League schools, and so I said, okay, I can make more money. So it all sounded great, and so I wanted to look into it more. and it happened to be going in from my senior year to my grad school year, because I was doing the 5-year master's of accounting program. That I looked into investment banking and internship opportunities in Cleveland. And funny, Western Reserve Partners is where I got my start at for that. So thank you guys for that. You guys were Western Reserve Partners was just starting out at the time, and Dave, you obviously have had a storied career there, and met Ralph and some of the other great guys there, and had a summer there, and really just enjoyed it. Able to use the different aspects of more than just accounting, but some of the other high finance strategies, and to me it really is where I wanted to be, and from there continue to work hard, and I ended up going to Chicago and working at Bank of America in investment banking, but that's how I at first kind of heard about it, got the taste of it, and it was really those competitive juices and wanting accounting's great, and so I don't know ill will towards it at all. I think it's a great backbone and got you prepared, but I wanted a chance to be in that next level. I felt it was you get to where you want to go a little faster, harder work. But I think you get the rewards are worth a little bit of the pain that you go through in those first few years. So that's what drew me to it.
And all of us, when we start something, when we start a new position, a new job, or new career path, we kind of go in with some assumptions and just things we believe about the industry. I mean, did all that stuff pan out, or were there things that surprised you in the industry that you didn't realize when you started?
I think I was relatively well prepared, and that's the funny thing is, I think we had a lot of I think a good business background at Miami. I think came out of school pretty well prepared and had always been a worker. So I think someone that has maybe never worked before in their life, going straight from zero or just a couple side jobs to working 90 hours a week. I think 90 hours a week is hard for anyone, and so especially if you didn't have a business background so if you're coming from undergrad with a English lit degree or something like that, and you weren't kind of a workhorse your whole life, or I think that can be just mind numbing to some people. So I think coming from more of a blue collar background and just a business school was very helpful, and so but it's hard to ever prepare completely for 90 hours, but you almost psych yourself up, right? Like you're getting ready to go to the big leagues, and I had not been around. I've heard about all these kind of really intense, smart people you're going to be competing against, so you're almost like, what world are they going to be on? Are they going to be that much better? And you're kind of nervous about it, but at the end of the day, you realize everyone is kind of like each other, right? You're all 23-year-old kids, 22 or whatever, coming out and just wanting to make a mark and still liking to have fun. And I thought that was the good part, is everyone did want to work hard, play hard. That mindset was there, and just everyone was hungry to learn. So I thought it was just a great environment overall.
Yeah, and I guess for guys like you, even though it is competitive, you almost use that to rise to the challenge, and it drives you to do better, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and just because during the recruiting process, there was a lot of, well, you don't really recruit a lot from Miami, Ohio. It's one of the bigger banks, and even though you kind of had all the marks, you had good internships. I had a pretty high GPA. It took a lot of interviews and a lot of going around different avenues to get in. So that always, it always it stays with you a bit, and so you're just wondering like what. I think it motivated me, right? And you want to make a good name for yourself and for your school and that kind of thing. And so to me, that always was a part of it.
I probably get one question a week from someone that comes from a school like yours, or even where I went to, just that says, my school, it doesn't have great recruiting from these big banks. What can you tell me? I mean, how do you usually answer that question when people say, I'm not at a target school, how do I get into one of those big banks?
Yeah, well, the way I always say is there's a good chance there was at least a few alums that have found their way into one of these bigger banks at some point. And I do think that along the way, some of these banks have learned that even these non-target schools like Miami has started to produce some good bankers, and so they're a little bit more accepting. They just might not go to your school, but they've realized that they've had some good people come through it. So it's always finding that person that went to that school and that's going to have that soft spot, because what you will find out is they might have had a similar situation, and if you're really good, they will go to the mat and push you in harder than others. So trying to find someone as high up as possible that went to your school is always a good route. And I can't remember where I found that list, or just kind of, I went to some of the. There'd be a few people that would come back to their, to Miami to talk about banking. I remember that's how it came out. It wasn't even through the accounting group. It was some finance group said there was an investment banker coming in, and you have to put yourself in the right spot, right? So if you're a non-target school, if you're just like, okay, you can't be just middle of the road. You have to be at the top of your class, or high up there if you're at a non-target school, because you already got a little bit of a detriment, and try to just really show that you're interested in banking, have done your homework, and that you're going to, when you interview, you're not going to get the luxury of not knowing what a DCF is or some of these different aspects of it. It'll be very helpful to get in. And also, if you try to go to some boutique banks and try internship, if you really want to go the big bank route, to have at least you're never going to learn all the nomenclature unless you've probably had an internship there, took one of those investment banking class. There's like those training the street classes that'll help. So that's another way.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if you feel this way now that we're both farther along in our career, but your biggest example was find a person that can relate to you, that you have a connection with, that can help you achieve your goal, which when you think about it, it's no different than, how we approach business the rest of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's kind of funny that it's you learn it one way or another.
I probably tried 50. I put my resume in 50 different banks, or maybe not that many, but a lot, through their normal process. Didn't get anywhere, no matter how much I followed up. But it was the few that I got to the final round interviews. It was, found a Miami alum, talked to them, told them how much I have been trying to get in, showed them a good resume, and what can you do, and they help push you along, right? And I think you're right. You find that a lot in business. It's kind of reaching out, making the case, but being prepared when the case does come, that you can back up what you say.
Yeah. Okay, I want to shift to what you did next, which a lot of people go into private equity next out of banking, but what was the thought process behind that decision for you?
Yeah, so I liked investment banking, had a chance to stay and kind of go to that from analyst to associate route, but I think what drew me to private equity was having a little bit of a vested interest in not just jumping from a transaction to transaction. Yes, you are still deal heavy. You see a lot of deals in private equity, so it's not like you're just with one company. But when you make the decision to go forward, you're living with that decision. You're able to get a little bit more well-rounded, and that's one thing that never left me. Even so, I had an accounting background, went in investment banking. So, but I liked being part of how do you make their finance department better? How do we analyze numbers better so it's not just putting together a pitch book or how to sell businesses. I wanted to be, how do I improve it operationally? That part of me never left. And so I like that aspect about private equity and the longer tenure of decisions that you made and working. I like that part of investment banking. I thought it was great to go work with the CFO in order to help them analyze stuff. And it was one thing I thought I excelled at, and worked well with the management teams. And I thought private equity is even better because it's not just for 6 months that you do it with that person. You create this relationship, then you're done, right? And here, you're just like, as long as we hold the company for, getting that relationship with some top executives and becoming almost a member of their team. So I like that ability. And I happened to join private equity, and soon after, it was right when everything was collapsing in middle of 2008. And so there wasn't a ton of new deals going on. And one thing I got to do a lot of is get hands-on, and that suited me well. And so I wasn't afraid to dig in and and really become almost like an extension of the finance departments at some of the portfolio companies we had.
When you first started, did you have to, let me step back. Did you have to relearn or learn how to navigate, how hands-on to be with certain companies? Was that something that you had to deal with? I've heard that from other people, that you go from one industry to another, and your role changed from advisor to either board member or, partner as an investor. So did you have to, did it take you a while to figure out how to change your role and your mindset there?
You know, not as much as I think some would think, and maybe it's just how you naturally kind of talk to people. I mean, I think if you go into the mindset that, it's a weird mindset because in one area, you're the majority owner of this company, your group is, right? But at the same time, the management's the one that runs it. And they almost view you at times of, okay, you're asking me a lot of questions, or what do you know? You're 24, 25, And so you have to understand that, when you're at the associate level in private equity, you're a young person. They don't want to hear just all of your opinions, and you haven't been out in the industry long. So, but at the same time, a lot of us are pretty advanced in certain skill areas and are hopefully pretty bright. And so you do have some good ideas. And so you have to almost prove it first, right? And really have that servant attitude where even though you're technically part of the ownership team and helping them, you feel like you're almost working for that portfolio company and really gain the trust of that CFO and CEO and trying to help them out. So even though we had some CFOs that weren't always doing the right thing, they started to really notice that, wow, this person can help me, and he is helping us, and fixing things and not making me look stupid when he does find mistakes and blah blah blah. And it gives you to a certain trust level, and then when you get there, you can gain it quicker because at the end of the day, all these portfolio companies and the executives, the good ones, they're all hoping people they like when the private equity firms can help them, and we do have a unique set of skills where a lot of these companies in the lower middle market or middle market don't have a ton of advanced finance guys on their team. So and you have to be humble and you have to have a servant attitude first. But if you like doing that and you like talking to people, it comes pretty quick. I don't think it was a huge gap, in my opinion.
Okay, that's good. I mean, I know I've heard other people struggle a little bit more with it, so that's great, and that probably explains why you change roles again. You didn't really move, but you've had some direct CFO experience now. Talk about that and how that. And when you think about it, you're pretty unique. You were an investment banker. You were at the fund level of a private equity, and then you went inside to work as a CFO of one of these companies. Talk about that experience and how that was kind of eye-opening for you.
Yeah, that was actually the bigger jump, and just because it's just a totally different group of people you're working with and types of people you're working with, and that was challenging and really fun. And was young at the time making that jump, so that was just added to the intensity of making sure that you did it right. So yeah, I happened to have the opportunity before trying to figure out my game plan of did 2 years in banking, had done 2 years in private equity, was planning to do another year, but I had a CFO that had been transitioning out of one of our portfolio companies, and we've been looking for a new one and weren't able to find one. And I was saying, hey, I don't know what I want to do next after private equity. I think I want to be in an exec position sooner rather than later. How do you get there, right? And didn't really think I wanted to get my MBA, and so I knew I was probably a bit young, hadn't had any direct experience, but I thought I could do the job. I had been working with that company really hard in the CEOL, and eventually everyone kind of agreed and said, hey, let's see how this works. I think Matt can do it, and if not, we know that he can at least still be a good worker there, and we'll find another CFO along the way if he can't handle the responsibilities. And so I was able to do it, and I found it very unique, and just I loved it. I mean, so I wanted to go there because I am passionate about you. I think some of the great things about private equity um, was that you got to work on multiple businesses, see new deals. You're still in the mix of day to day, like what's going on in the business world. It's a little bit of a flip flop when you go into one company. It's you kind of lose track of what's going on in the Wall Street Journal, right? You're not reading that every day. That's not part of your job is to know what's the M&A environment. You're like, how do I solve what's going on in this very unique setting of how do I get better prices with my supplier or handle our inventory levels and just get on the operational floor more to find out why our costs have been creeping up on various overhead levels. So you went from being like you're like a mile deep in one area. But I've always liked that. I like to see things working like a charm. It bothers me if it's not. So to be very intense in one company was good. I think some people probably like the more spread out and helping in a lot of different areas. I've liked both over time. I think it's unique, but that was some of the main differences of jumping into a CFO role um, from private equity, and it was just funny because it's not like some accounting gap rules role was going to trip you up as becoming a CFO. Like everyone was worried about. I think a lot of people coming from investment banking or private equity think about maybe going to the ops side, and they say, "Well, boy, I've never been an accountant per se. I had classes or whatever, but you're not doing pension accounting for GM, right? You're going to these companies. It's pretty. They have people in there doing a lot of accounting and other stuff that you can help with is not overly difficult. The hard part to learn was just we have bank accounts in Switzerland that we need to make sure we're getting transferred. Just the mechanics of okay, what was the people doing before, right? We need to make sure that those don't get dropped because the CFO has a lot of in middle market companies is doing a lot of those hands-on things. You don't have a million people underneath you, so you need to make sure that checks are getting written and the suppliers getting paid, and that just how to make sure that the 401k payments got set up that week or whatever it is. So there's those little things that aren't technically hard, but you just need to make sure you get on schedule. That was the hardest part in that first couple of months of just knowing all the things that get done at a company. But from there, I think a lot of our analytical background is very helpful for groups that maybe haven't had, that younger analytical person in there before.
Do you believe that your accounting background helped though?
Yeah, I mean, you knew, I guess.
Versus just having like a finance degree.
Yeah, I think it helps. I mean, I think you go in there because you have a different level of confidence, right? So you go in there and you said, hey, I never really had problems. If you didn't have problems understanding concepts in accounting classes where you probably did drill into some pretty harder topics in the higher level accounting classes, you're not going to have any problems in company accounting. You just won't. I mean, you just need to figure out maybe your GL, maybe you haven't spent that much time and you have to relearn it's not even relearning. It's just every company sets up their GL differently. And, but once you kind of see that and how your daily closing processes are, and there should be some people underneath you that already do that. I think it's not, I think you can be fine if you just had a finance degree as well. It just really, I think it's not overly difficult, I would say.
Okay. All right.
But accounting background is a little bit more helpful because you've had more classes to feel comfortable with various types of nomenclature or whatnot.
Yeah. One I'm curious about, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to talk about it for a second. When I went inside a company for a period of time and I had the same thesis about going really deep with a company, and I got to be honest, I got a little bored in one industry, and I did miss the variety of being an advisor, or if I were in private equity, you get to see a bunch of different companies. I mean, did you ever have feelings of that, or did that creep into the mix?
Yes and no. I think if maybe I was at a company for 10 years, that would start to be something to think about. I guess, fortunately enough, when I went into the CFO role, things were working well with that business. helped fine tune them, and then we ended up going in the sales process within the first year and a half that I was there. It ended up being very successful. So there was always exciting new things going on that you were at a focal point, and I love the ability. I think there's a lot of roles for like a CFO type role to be kind of that right hand man of the CEO and of the private equity group and looking at things and having a strategic focus. So I think it can be exciting. I think if it was a larger public company where you're just in the accounting group of it, I think it could be very a different experience, and that's why if in an operational type role, I think it's more focused in middle market, lower middle market companies where you're private equity owned, that you expect to kind of get it to the next level and not, and then transition along the way. Yeah, to me, that's kind of the right spot, is making companies really well, working well, and then gone. But if you're kind of doing the same thing in and out for 10 years, it might not fit all of our personalities the same way. But I mean, I hear your point. If you're more of a, it can get like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense too. The timing was a little different than some people. So I'm curious about that too, though. You mentioned in the middle market, lower middle market companies, the CFO often has a lot of different roles, including HR and IT. Did you have to interact with those pieces as well, or did they have other people doing that?
Yeah, no, I did. And that actually is a good point. That was some of the harder stuff to get into, for sure. Like IT, I'm not not the best at understanding any of the programming side of things. And then here we had Oracle at that company I was at, the first one, and you realize. So we had an IT team, and then we had Oracle consultants, and it was already implemented. Thank God. I don't know how I could have handled it if I had to handle an implementation. But you just realize that it's at the center of so many people want reports, and how many of them can get messed up so quickly if you don't run it all down, because IT people aren't accountants, right? So having to just, what I realized is planning it out and asking questions. And that was maybe one thing I did more of. I asked a lot of questions on things because I knew I was new and had a chance to do that. And I took advantage of asking questions and making sure, how did this, if we change this here, how does it affect it? And always double and triple checking the numbers after you run an IT report is critical. I would say I've learned that lesson of don't just give the thing to the IT guy of what you want, but then also make sure you also double check of doing some examples and testing it, because if you can run into some issues. But yeah, that was interesting of trying to handle some of that, and can be frustrating for sure.
Did you have to get involved with the HR side of things too?
Yeah, handling a new. That was when Obamacare was just coming out, and people were wondering how that was going to affect things. And so I remember, you had to negotiate rates, and how we're going to change our health insurance potentially if rates go up too much, and so yeah, there was that kind of stuff that I had never been involved with, and learning about what was it on the workers' comp. You learn all these different, it's had a couple accidents a few years before, but that now affects your rate a few years afterwards, and it takes a while to get that off, and you got to deal with higher claims rates and shopping that around. So yeah, things that I never really thought I was going to be part of. You do realize if you hate dealing with what in the finance industry we probably consider minuscule items, right? That you're just like, I don't want to deal with talking to the insurance guy on a rate, or shopping it around, or going on a phone call with the commercial bank on why our fees or this or that. Unfortunately, that's a lot of stuff. They just don't get done unless somebody takes the bull by the horns and does it. And a lot of times it's the CFO. There's just not a ton of, in lower middle market, a ton of people just doing it, right? Like they already have a lot just to make the product and get the basics done. So if you're trying to take one extra step of something new, getting something new implemented, it falls a lot on the CFO's role, or probably COO in many companies too on that. But yeah, those are the little things that sound little, but can take a lot of hours in a week or in a month to negotiate or get done. We were changing a 401k plan. That was the other one and converting that was just such a headache. So there's some definitely non-fun stuff on that side of the world too.
Yeah, but it's things that are important to the business overall, and you figure it out.
Yeah, you just figure it out, and you do feel good about you get it done right once, and then you don't have to worry about it. So there is a sense of accomplishment. There's always things going on.
Yeah, I want to go back to one thing before we move forward. Something you and I have talked about recently, and that you've relayed to me about your different private equity experiences, and I just want to make sure people hear this when they're thinking about fit. You've been in a couple different firms of different sizes, and just talk about the differences between different ends of the market when you're dealing with middle market companies, because that a middle market company can mean 100 different things to 100 different people. So talk about the couple of the differences you've seen in at the larger end and kind of the end where you guys are now.
Yeah, so at I would classify them as both lower middle market. So my first private equity group I was with, Brockway Moran. So that's where I came after being at Bank of America in Chicago. Went to Brockway Moran, which was Boca Raton. They were a $700 million fund, focused on a lot of companies that were probably 20 million of EBITDA to 20 to 40 million of EBITDA. I would say is a lot of the companies that we had in our portfolio. And then with Blue Sea Capital, it's a $330 million fund, and focused on about companies half that size. So more of 10 million is kind of the sweet spot. But there's a big change even from 10 million of EBITDA to 20 million, and I think both groups were relatively hands-on. That was one staple, and something that frankly I like, and that's one of the reasons I was drawn to going there, because I did want to get more of that ops feel and connection with management. I had a lot of friends that went to bigger private equity funds where it felt more of, they told me that, there's good and bad. You got probably paid a little bit more, but they also were just a lot of quantitative stuff still. A lot more work in the background, things being flipped over to them, and maybe bigger teams on new deals, for instance, and running a lot of analytics. Where I would say at both Brockway and at Blue Sea, very heavy in portfolio management and working with the companies after the deal was done, not just focusing on new deals, and even more intense with Blue Sea than probably Brockway. So it was just, a 10 million EBITDA business, you're going to be involved with it. And looking at what upgrades or how many other, a lot of it's upfront. You need a couple other pieces in terms of management, whether it's new positions or an upgrade here or there. And it's almost like you're taking on some of those. There's only so much in a day that the management team was doing before, and that they can do. So if you need to implement a new system or a better sales force work for you're going to there be the help. And I think that's, you got to be ready for that, and liking to do that. If not, I think it's harder to distinguish yourself in the lower middle market if you're not willing to help them with some of their execution. Hopefully it's not 5 years that you're going to have to be executing for them all the time, but in that first year in implementing kind of their 90-day plan, and until you get everyone accustomed to getting these new things worked out so they can get the benefit of these new initiatives, there's not a lot of extra time that they have to put them in. So I think, we're the team, the private equity groups, the professionals are the team doing it. And, so I noticed that there was just a little bit more kind of emphasis on that in the lower middle market you go. There's just a bigger need for our help.
Yeah, I would echo that, having been on the other side of that when I was with that private equity owned business. That's something that we didn't have enough of. I don't think we were missing kind of that hands-on feel for a variety of reasons. But it's like you said, that there's a limited amount of time, and if they're still trying to get their old jobs done, and you add on some new initiatives, it's really tough. You can't run a business from a spreadsheet, right? You can't just kind of want to get the numbers and ask for things and push some buttons and hope that things actually change day to day in the business.
Yeah, it's a paradigm shift. I think it's hard for a lot of PE guys that maybe haven't been in the upside of things to realize how much of the day just gets eaten up by, an HR thing, something that happens where the day-to-day running of the business, and their hours, the exact hours are already pretty soaked up with a lot of items. And then the middle management at a lot of companies, it's like, hey, I have a 45 or 40-hour work week, 50-hour work week, whatever it is, and I'm sticking to it, and very rarely will they go much above that. So where do we think these new initiatives get done? And when we come in there and we have done a ton of diligence, let's say, and say, okay, we could be doing this better, this better. Yeah, that's great, but where is it all going to get done at? And I think sometimes we need to slow down or figure out, okay, which ones we're putting in first and what people are going to be best to do it. And it's not easy because of course, if you see things that aren't getting done well, everybody, the executives want to get it done too. It's not that they don't. So that's the hardest balance, and I don't think anyone has it figured out perfectly. No, I mean, if they did, no one has it done completely well. But if you're doing it as a team approach, I think that's just important. That the private equity guys have to feel like they need to get their hands a little dirty, and I thought that the group I was at had done a really good job of it in the past of understanding and not just asking questions, but also willing to help actually get the results and taking some things off the hands where they know if we knew we were better at certain analytics, it's like, okay, don't ask somebody that is probably going to struggle and take 5 times more time. Let's just do it ourselves and ask for the info. And we did that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great perspective. All right, let's move forward a little bit. So we've talked about kind of the 3 main things you've done: banking, private equity, and internal corporate finance, CFO type work. So now you have a perspective on all those 3. You've probably learned a lot about yourself in this process. What questions would you ask someone else, or how would you help someone else decide that for themselves? What do they need to know about themselves? What characteristics should they have to make a decision to go into either one of those things? Just maybe quickly run through, the 3 pieces and what type of person would be good or excel or really enjoy those different roles.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll hopefully not meander around them too much, but I think you said it best. Like I think first of all, I think the private equity route is really interesting if you're a person that wants to get a pretty well-rounded balance, and in terms of, hey, I like finance, but I'm not just a finance or accounting guy. I also like to understand some sales and ops and that was that helped me out in my role as being a better CFO down the road, is because I've had thought about a lot of various initiatives and, hey, what's the decision on, moving this business to another location? And granted, CFOs are always involved in those things, but maybe not from the same perspective. So, I mean, I thought the private equity route was a good blend of, if you do maybe get bored or don't want to handle some of those issues that I've talked about, like some of the HR things or transitioning a 401k plan, that if you just I never want to get into that much detail and have to worry about it, then private equity should be able to stay away a little bit from some of those things, because hopefully you do get people at the company that can handle some of those other items. Investment banking, if you like the thrill of just closing a deal and knowing that more of that, almost like a salesmanship role, I think it becomes more of that down the road. When we're all the analysts and an associate, you're more numbers crunching. But I think the cool thing about investment banking that I saw over time is it really becomes a people thing where you're helping somebody in the biggest time of their life. And if you really just like that advisor feel, and that you did something really important for someone, and that you feel great about what you did, I think the more senior you get in investment banking, the more of that it becomes, right? And so I would almost say, you can't look at just an analyst or an associate position in investment banking if you're giving someone advice of what they want to do longer term, because it's a lot different than what you end up being in investment banking. I think investment banking at the end becomes more relationship based, more you're getting around, you're traveling more, you're seeing a bunch of companies and trying to figure out, how can I help this this person really make an important decision in their life, or company in the company's life cycle. So I think that's the really cool thing about investment banking. I think it's probably a harder road to get there. They really weed out people in those first 4 or 5 years, and so if you can withstand some of that and then get to that more personal side, I think that's helpful. But I think it's hard in banking to succeed long term if you don't like the personal side and the salesmanship of it, because there's not a ton of roles for high MDs for just quant guys. And if you like more of a perfection and having more of a say and seeing one thing completely through and knowing that you can see day in, day out, like how your results change something. I think being at the company side at a position that can be influential, of that COO, CFO, VP of sales, or CEO, I think that you would want to maybe go more on the company side, because I think that's one thing that's really gratifying is, you get options in one business that you're at, and it's great when 3 years down the road, you're a big part of doing that, and you get financially rewarded. And I think there's a big lack of talent in middle market companies, probably a lot of companies in management. I think there's just a lack of it. I think a lot of people went into other routes, whether it being a lawyer, or a banker, or PE, and so I think there's a lack of good people there, and you can make a big impact early. So I think, but you're going to get some frustrations and have to deal with people that might not be all, as highly educated as a lot of us were in finance and work at the same hours and that kind of stuff. So you got to be willing to handle a lot of different types of personalities. So, but I personally like all three of them. I like them all in different ways. But those are I would talk to a person about it like that.
Yeah, thanks for taking us through that. I mean, that's what I wanted people to hear too, is that they can all be rewarding, they can all be interesting, they can all be frustrating, and they can all be tough at times, right? And it's really, I don't think, I've said this to other people, I can't think of a career in finance where if you aren't at the top of your game, no matter what their title or role is, that you can't do well. And I really encourage people usually to really think about what they want long term. Don't just go for the popular or the 2 or 3 roles that people say that are the best, right? You need to find out what's best for you.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think big time agree with what you said, probably more than ever, is that you can really be financially rewarded in very similar ways longer term in either route. In any of those 3, I think earlier on, investment banking compared to just joining a company is, you'll make more in investment banking those first couple of years, and probably get a pretty good skill set. So I do think that's an interesting way to go rather than ground up corporate level. But that's just my take on it, and maybe it's because that's what I did, and that's the route But I think longer term, whether you go back into the industry on the outside, or private equity or investment banking, they can all be very financially rewarding. So you really need to figure out the type of personality you have.
Yeah. All right. I want to move to a couple last things here before we wrap up. You've been very generous with your time. You mentioned it in passing, but no MBA for you?
What did you say, Dave?
I said you mentioned it in passing, but it's no MBA for you. There's no plans there.
Yeah, no, not at the moment. I think you have to weigh that decision of, you're making pretty good money at the time, and taking that income out of it, foregoing the income and then paying $50,000 a year, to me it's a big difference. And so you have to really say, where does it take you, and do you need that into where you're going to go? And at that point in my life too, I was already married and didn't have kids yet, but probably wasn't too far off. So, and I looked at it and said, hey, I really wanted to go back to I wanted to try to be a CFO at that time, or get somewhere close to that position. And I knew I didn't want to go to work at a large public company like Procter & Gamble or Boeing or something down the road. So I said, most of the people I talked to you don't need the MBA for what I was trying to get at. And it would have been better to have been a controller, let's say, for a couple of years rather than go to get an MBA. I already had my master's in accounting. So for me, I didn't have as much value in the MBA. I think especially if you have a master's of accounting or a big business background. I've heard that it's more of kind of sometimes for name or whatever, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it can be good, but you just have to weigh everyone's situation.
Yeah, I think that's smart, and I just like to ask sometimes because everyone has a different opinion, and we all seem to be doing okay, no matter what.
No, I think that's the good thing is, you're right. And everyone probably leans towards the decision they ended up making, right? So I've heard many things both ways, and I think in certain industries it definitely plays a part. So you have to look at where do you ultimately want to go, and what do people in those positions ultimately have. So if you're looking to in private equity, and a lot of the times the people want you to go back and get it from a top 10 school, yeah, you're probably going to want to go, or at some point you're going to be maybe punished, or it'll be harder to maybe move around or whatever it is. In other industries, it's not as big, and if you're just doing good work, that's just as important. So,
yeah. If you look back over your career, all the different roles, the different places, is there anything you can point to that has really challenged you the most? Something that maybe took you a little while to learn, took you a little while to figure out?
I mean, challenge. I think the biggest challenge is figuring out your work life balance. Honestly, I mean, um, there hasn't. It's not like most of these things are rocket science, right? A lot of the business problems, whether I haven't seen anything that's just overly crazy complex where you can't brain power figure out that business problem. The problem is finding other people. How do you make sure that you're not the only person carrying the torch, and then not overworking yourself to the point where then you just spread yourself too thin, right? You put your hand up because you know it can get done better. And this is if you're at the company, or even if you're PE working for the company, helping the company out. You take on too many things, or you get too stressed out because you take on just too much, and you don't have the right balance at home. And so I think that's what catches up to a lot of people, right? No one's taught you that in school or whatnot. You kind of go from school, or you're growing being a kid, and you kind of all about yourself, this, that, and the other, and then you go to work, and then you have family and all that kind of stuff, and it becomes hard to balance them all if you want to be doing a great job in all of them. And a lot of us, that's tough because you want to be doing A+ work at all, and sometimes it feels like you're not passing at that type of level, and it's hard to be an A in each one of those areas. So I think that's for type A personalities that like to be, nail every detail out of each thing they do. Trying to do that in all aspects of your life can be difficult.
Yeah, well said. All right, one last question to wrap up. A lot of people that listen to this show are learners. They like to read things. They like to listen to things. They listen to this podcast, obviously, to educate themselves, to improve themselves personally. Are there any resources, books, or even if you don't have any examples there, even some people that you've learned from that is your source of inspiration, your personal development? Where do you look for to kind of get better every day?
That's a great question. I probably don't have a great answer. I mean, there's been people I've worked with, so I don't have any kind of famous characters or person that's where the listeners of the show would know. I've happened to work with great people over time that have all helped me at different points in my life. I mean, starting with my dad, of just looking up to him for his work ethic and how he's been, to that first mentor I had that was at his work, Adam Stern, who told me about investment banking, to some of the guys that I then worked for, whether it's Mark Silk. There's a lot of guys that I've worked for over time that have just been really great people. So I think those type of personal relationships, it's good to find someone that you feel are good at what they do, and create a relationship and get inspiration from them. In terms of books I've liked over time, I haven't been reading a lot. I have two young kids, but Atlas Shrugged, I remember, was a really just good book. I don't know if I would say an inspirational book, but I just thought one of the better reads that I've ever had. It's a long one. And then in terms of bettering yourself, it's like I'm a Christian guy, and I try to think about those principles and whatnot to be better daily, and listen to some various stations and stuff on that. And but yeah, I mean, look at your family too, to how to improve yourself.
That's great. Thanks for sharing, and it was great to have you on.
All right, thanks, Dave. It's been great.
Hey there, it's David again. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Matt. He's a great guy, has had some really nice experience, and we went into some nice detail about what he's done. So hope you took a lot from it, learned a little bit about what each of those career paths could be for you. And I think you can hear my kids in the background right now. And I hope that it will help you decide what might fit you best. Talk to you again soon.